Morning, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining us. I am April Verrett. I serve as president of SEIU Local 2015. I'm also a member of the Committee for Greater LA, and I've had the honor of chairing the steering committee of the Black Experience Action Team. In September of 2020, the Committee for Greater LA released the No Going Back report. Our report called for an analysis of the multifaceted lives of Black people in Los Angeles, led by Black leaders well-versed in the facts, figures, and experiences, in order to tell the story of the generational discrimination and disinvestment in Black communities throughout Los Angeles County. In order to address the generational inequalities Black communities face, our Black Experience Action Team was assembled. Over 30 civic leaders came together to deliver a roadmap meant to improve the material conditions and outcomes of all Angelenos, particularly Black Angelenos. Today, we are thrilled to brief you on our report. The road to racial justice runs through equity, ending anti-Black racism in Los Angeles. This isn't just a report, people. It is a call to action that focuses on 7 key areas: housing and homelessness, the economy and poverty relief, advocacy and political power, policing and mass incarceration, education and youth development, physical health and mental well-being, and last but definitely not least, environmentally safe and healthy neighborhoods and communities. Before we dive into the report, I must thank our sponsors who made all of this work possible: the Weingart Foundation, the California Wellness Foundation, the Mayor's Fund of Los Angeles, SEIU Local 2015, the Annenberg Foundation, Wells Fargo, Los Angeles County Supervisor Holly Mitchell, SEIU Local 721, Blue Shield of California, the Brotherhood Crusade, UDW AFSCME Local 3930, IBEW Local 11, Los Angeles County City Council Member Mark Ridley Thomas, Sarah DeSalt, and Star Insights. While the current state of Black LA and the information in our report may be disheartening to many, it is intended to be a mirror, to do what mirrors do: reflect the reality of what is there and spur us towards self-improvement. The road to racial justice runs through equity, ending anti-Black racism in Los Angeles, is a love letter to the Black community in LA, and an encouragement to the city's legislators, civic and community leaders, and to all of us to do better, to be better, because we deserve better. The transformation we call for isn't the responsibility of some of us. Black folk didn't get here alone, and we won't change things alone. In the report, we highlight how multiple sectors, corporations and businesses, government, nonprofit, and philanthropy can work together to address the 7 key areas of focus for Black Angelenos. This isn't a one and done pledge to invest in Black LA. This is a call to be in it for the long haul. While the report focuses on the immediate term and the next 10 years, we look for an implementation and focus the report over the next 25 years. This project was led with love, a shared love for each other and our communities in which we live, that we enrich and that we create. It is imperative that we highlighted the contributions that Black people have given to the city from a historical point of view by incorporating a social justice art carousel. It's entitled "We Revolve, We Resolve." Arts engagement has been a critical piece of our work from the start. As art has played such a critical role in giving voice to those of members of our community who have traditionally been overlooked, we cannot move forward together without embracing the power of Black art, Black artists, and Black creators. Before I hand it over to the other speakers, I do just want to touch briefly on the economic and poverty relief conditions. You'll find in the report that the unemployment rates of Black people in May of 2021 is comparable to those in 2008 during the Great Recession. Despite the fact of what the media and propaganda wants to tell us about us, there are more Black people participating in the labor force today. We go to work, right? We go to work. We need to create good, well-paying jobs that are family sustaining and that allows all of us the ability not just to survive and get by, but to thrive. And we also must support building wealth in our communities by investing in Black-owned businesses and Black people. Overall, the Black economic success, our vision points to cutting poverty and unemployment in half, restoring Black households' economic resiliency, making sure there's more access to capital for Black businesses and founders. We must deal with reparations at local, state, and federal levels, create a social safety net that is culturally competent and allows our communities to really thrive. And we must always provide resources and services designed for a Black community that is not monolithic, that includes immigrants, LGBTQ plus people, and people living with intellectual and physical disabilities. Today, you're going to hear from some of the amazing members of our steering committee, as well as Miguel Santana, the president and CEO of the Weingart Foundation and chair of the Committee for Greater LA, Corey Matthews, the chief operating officer of the Community Coalition and member of our action team, Karen Mack, who is the founder and executive director of LA Commons, the amazing Rita Stevens. She is a member of the LAHSA Ad Hoc Committee on Black people experiencing homelessness, and she was able to share her life experience with our committee early on. And the voice you will hear next is the amazing and incomparable Dr. Ange-Marie Hancock Alfaro. We all know she is the Dean's Professor and chair of the Department of Political Science and International Relations at USC. And she has served as the academic lead for this project. Ange-Marie.
So much, April. And I want to express our thanks as the lead of the academic council that was supporting the Black Experience Action Team. The way in which April led, the way in which the entire community came together on the beat, as well as all of the folks who came in and talked, has just been tremendous. So we really want to thank you. And so if we can pull up the slides, then we'll be able to get started. So what I'm going to talk to you about today are really some of the highlights from what has been a tremendous 6 to 9 month process, really, since the release of the very successful No Going Back LA, which the Committee for Greater LA put out last September. So when we talk about the path to justice running through equity, one of the visions, next slide, that we had was really a grappling with the question of, next slide, how we actually think about what does a Los Angeles free of anti-Black racism look like? So we'll talk about that a little bit. Then we will talk about a 10-year vision, which came out of many of our deliberations. And then why process matters. And then we're going to do a Q&A. So next slide, please. So when we think about what does a Los Angeles free of anti-Black racism look like, one of the things that we did was really ground the conversation in the principles of Black equity. And so when we think about those principles of Black equity, one of the things we can talk about is we need to think about ideas like truth. We need to actually tell the truth, right? In the immortal words of, James Baldwin, nothing can be changed until it is faced. And so we need to really tell the truth. When we think about the idea of strength, we are talking about the fact that Black people have been in Los Angeles and part of the aspirations of Los Angeles ever since the founding of the city itself, right? And it's going to take some strength in 2021 to really think about what does a Los Angeles free of anti-Black racism look like. Similarly, when we think about strength and truth and what needs to happen going forward, we want to be strategic about the ways in which we disrupt narratives, the ways in which we disrupt different systems, policies, and processes that have been part of the conventional wisdom for decades, if not centuries. So it's not just let's upset the apple cart for upsetting the apple cart's sake, but to actually be very strategic about how we do that. And last but certainly not least, the idea of love. If the last 8 years of Black Lives Matter and many other kinds of confrontations that have happened decades and centuries before, really embracing the idea that Black humanity is at the core of what we need to focus on going forward was another important element of the principles of Black equity that we brought to the conversation. Next slide, please. So when we think about what does a Los Angeles free of anti-Black racism look like, we really in the report tried to focus on 7 different issues which you heard before. So the first was certainly, click please, economics and poverty relief. The next one, as you heard, was housing and homelessness. The next one was education and youth development. And then after that, advocacy and political power. And then we talked about mass incarceration and police violence, as well as physical health and mental well-being and environmentally safe and healthy neighborhoods. And so during our process, we actually drilled down on all of these topics, sometimes spending 2 weeks on these topics, meaning 2 separate meetings where we just dedicated ourselves to really a holistic analysis of these topics. Next slide, please. So one of the things that came up early in our conversations in April or so about 2 months into our meeting progression, was a meeting that we had with community-based organization leaders. And a wonderful leader who has been part of this work for many, many years asked a friendly but rigorous question. He basically said, why do we need another report to tell us what we already know about the statistics of Black Los Angeles? And he really wanted to know what is going to make this report different. And that was really a call to action and a challenge for us. And so we grappled with the question of how will we know if we are making progress, right? So the point of this report is not simply to report the same kinds of statistics that you might have heard before, but to actually focus on what can we come together and agree upon should be, click please, the metrics of success. So we developed in this report, not just the facts of where Black people are right now in terms of the state of Black Los Angeles, but also what are those metrics we should keep an eye on as we go forward over the next 10 to 25 years. Next slide, please. So thinking about our key takeaway, next slide, please. We came up with a 10-year vision, and the idea for this 10-year vision was that we would really make the investments across sectors, across communities, to really think not just about what we want today's Black 5-year-old to experience when they're 15 or 25 years from now when they're 30, but also to really think about what it will take for this vision to come true. Click, please. So if you look at the 3 issues, we had visions that were very detailed within each of these 3 issues. So for example, in terms of economics and poverty relief, certainly cutting poverty and unemployment in half is an ambitious goal over the next 10 years. But we also talked about making sure that there are culturally competent mutual aid resources and equitable social services. Any study that you'll do of economic downturns in the United States, whether we go back to the Great Depression, right? Or we talk about 2008 and 2009, or even if we talk about today in 2020 and 2021, what we know is that as federal or state programs come out, the access that Black people, Black organizations, Black communities have to those actual programs is not at the comparable rate that it should be. For example, we did an empirical analysis of PPP loans, looking at all of the loans under $150,000 that were given in Los Angeles County. And we looked at over 147,000 loans. How many loans were given to Black businesses and awarded to Black businesses? 0.3%. When you think about the Black social safety net, those Black-led and Black empowering organizations, right, who when the federal government or the state government does not meet the need, they are the ones who preserve that mutual aid resource, provide that social safety net. When we look at their PPP loans, 8, I can put it on 2 hands, 0.005% of loans under $150,000 went to Black-led or Black empowering nonprofit organizations, the Black social safety net. So when we think about this vision, whether it's in economics or poverty relief, whether it's in housing and homelessness, one of the reasons why we came up with part of the vision that says we need to assist Black landlords is not just because they often rent to Black tenants in terms of having low levels of discrimination, but because those Black landlords aren't necessarily getting the kind of information they need to actually take advantage of the programs that have been put in place over the past 2 years to be able to get those rent arrears caught up. Similarly, with regard to education and youth development, we want to make sure that we have, for example, not just dedicated resources to ensure pandemic learning loss has been addressed, but really an in-depth recognition that there are going to be additional health needs that youth will have as they come back to school. We found some evidence of very interesting stories of Black youth who, while we would think they actually would do worse, given the digital divide and other things, actually did better when they were in online education because they weren't subject to the microaggressions and what it means to be Black and enrolled in a school. So we want to make sure that we're bringing an intersectional approach, but this is the vision that we've talked about across these 3 issues. Next slide, please. So when we look at the next 3 issues, thank you, we also want to recognize that some of these issues vary in terms of the progress that we've made, right? So when it comes to mass incarceration and police violence, Los Angeles has really been at the national cutting edge in terms of the kinds of policies and programs that they've passed. Certainly Measure J stands as a high watermark of that kind of work, right? And so we definitely wanted to push that vision further out and to make sure not just that there would be a vision that was ambitious, but also recognize there are needs around implementation and oversight that makes sure that we truly don't go back, to quote the original successful report. When we think about physical health and mental well-being, we also wanted to think about some things that, again, we have organizations that have focused on in the past, like an end to food deserts, but we also want to think about culturally competent resources for those who are disabled. In addition, with regard to environmentally safe and healthy neighborhoods, we really wanted to talk about all of those things that Black people experience that aren't necessarily part of a particular government agency, right? So this is the when you're barbecuing while Black, or when you can't sit in a Starbucks, right? How do you actually make sure that you're creating safe neighborhoods where people find freedom and belonging? And so this is all part of the 10-year vision that we want that 5-year-old who's 5 years old today in Los Angeles to actually experience when they're 15 and hopefully have a completion of it by the time that they're 30. Next slide. Last but certainly not least, we did want to recognize much of the progress that's been made with regard to advocacy and political power in terms of our representation on the County Board of Supervisors as well as the City Council. And so we definitely want to think about how to make sure that that political power is absolutely consolidated. But one of the things we heard in a lot of our focus groups was also making sure that all members of our City Council, all members of the Board of Supervisors are held accountable for the outcomes of this vision. Next slide, please. So how do we get there? One of the things that we talked about was really that there needs to be communal policy advocacy. So one of the things that we actually made sure we focused on was what was from an intersectional perspective. So not just thinking about it from the perspective of race or from the perspective of class and poverty or from the perspective of gender or sexuality or ability, we really wanted to focus on the ways in which all of these things can actually be moved when we look at some common policies, right? So the needle can get moved, for example, when we implement a universal basic income on the vision for economics and poverty relief, the vision for housing and homelessness, the vision for physical health and well-being. And so we developed 5 that we think, again, will lift all Angelenos, but will have a disparate positive impact on Black Angelenos. Next slide, please. So last, I want to talk a little bit about why our process matters. And this is important, particularly as we think about a motion that's going to come up in the Los Angeles City Council next Tuesday around making sure that Los Angeles is actually pursuing anti-racist policy across its many departments, across its huge infrastructure. And so when we thought about process, we really wanted to make sure that the people who were sitting around this table came from multiple sectors. And so that's why you're going to hear from people who were part of the action team. You're going to hear from people who have lived experience of the issues that we focused on, but also at the table were some of our government and elected officials as well. And so we're very happy to think about that motion coming up in Tuesday if it passes, because again, this vision can actually provide a blueprint for how people can think about the anti-racism motion that's going to be hopefully carried through on Tuesday. Next slide, please. So we've already talked a little bit about those communal accountability metrics, and in the report, they actually go by issue. So there are sets of accountability metrics that we would contend should be tracked across sectors to make sure that we're making progress over the next 10 years. Next slide, please. We also wanted to look at sector-specific actions that can become pledges. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to ask the person who's doing the slides to please refresh the screen so that we can make sure that the next slide is correct. Okay, so when we think about this, click please, one of the things that we did in the report was to make sure that actually we would have different ideas for each of the different sectors. So when you go through the issues, what you're going to see is boxes that say, what can the private sector or the corporate sector do? What can philanthropy do? What can government do? What can the nonprofit sector do? And so with regard to the private sector, for example, one of the things that we thought about had to do with really making sure that Black founders are getting access to capital, right? We know from the research that that's not often the case. And while philanthropy, like the Annenberg Foundation, have done innovative aspects of this work, we also want to make sure that the private sector is doing the same kind of work, right? When we think about what nonprofits can actually do, we actually saw, again, an intersectionality of the issues where we actually had someone suggest, and we thought it was a good idea, that folks who are working in the nonprofit arena around the environment and folks who are working in the nonprofit arena around housing and homelessness should actually be collaborating on work to make sure that people's experiences in public places are not subject to anti-Black surveillance and anti-Black policing. And then when we think about philanthropy, we can fund programmatic work led by organizations that are best positioned to reach Black landlords. Because again, as we talked about, the California Housing is Key program can help not just Black tenants, which is absolutely important, and you've probably seen that on people's radar, but also Black landlords. There was some interesting research that came out of UCLA with regard to the ways in which permanent supportive housing is actually provided to people experiencing homelessness. And one of the things they found was that there was not discrimination in the sense of denying Black people experiencing homelessness access to housing, but there was very much a directing and a targeting of which landlords would actually accept a Black tenant. Now, on its face, that's a bad thing because, again, we want to make sure that all landlords are following fair housing laws. But in terms of who's more willing to accept Black people experiencing homelessness as tenants in permanent supportive housing, we want to make sure that Black landlords who might be more open to doing that and Black landlords who are keeping people in housing, often to their own financial detriment because they're not major corporations, also get support from the California Housing is Key program. Click, please. And so when we think about government, We want to make sure that we are also thinking about, for example, again, that our Black community is diverse, and we want to provide culturally competent mental health services to Black migrants, particularly Black women, gender nonconforming and trans folks, as well as Black migrants who may, in fact, be undocumented as well. This was, again, another of the interesting pieces that we wanted to make sure we lifted up, which is to say that anti-Blackness does affect the ways in which deportation rates operate, as well as who is actually incarcerated for being undocumented. We see some of those same disparities that we see in policing and mass violence in the domestic context affecting our immigration system as well. And so you can click through a couple more times and we're going to move to the next slide, please. So when we think about, again, why process matters, in addition to Ms. Reba, who you're going to hear from today, we had a total of 10 lived experience presenters, right? Who, again, acknowledged the intersectionality of their lives. And they really talked about how these 7 issues couldn't be kind of separate issues, right? So when Audre Lorde says we don't live single issue lives, the folks who brought their lived experience to our conversations really kind of provided proof of that idea. We also had 37 beat team members, and we also had 20 nonprofit CBO leaders as well. So next slide, please. When we think about why this process and why this report really should have the impact that we hope that it will, we want to think about the idea that we actually used principles of community co-design to make sure that we weren't just, a bunch of people in a Zoom room having conversations amongst ourselves. Now, granted, our beat team was very diverse. We had representatives from elected officials at both the city and county level. We had 20 CBO leaders who were part of our process. We had people with lived experience. We had folks from unions. We had folks from philanthropy and the corporate sector. But we also wanted to make sure we took it back to the community. And so we hosted 4 community feedback sessions during the month of July. And we asked them, we told them, you can rip it up. You can tell us we're completely wrong. You can tell us we need to go back to the drawing board. You can tell us what's missing. And they gave us tremendous feedback, and it was very helpful in producing the final report. Next slide, please. So again, I want to thank all of our sponsors. And at this point, I'm going to pitch it over to my brother and my colleague, Corey Matthews, COO of Community Coalition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hancock. I really appreciate that. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Corey Matthews, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Community Coalition. We are a 31-year-old civil rights and community organizing institution, and we were founded to change the social and economic conditions that led to widespread poverty, addiction, and crime in South LA. As a native of South Los Angeles, my organization and our participation in this particular team is very personal and important to me. Now, if you were to ask me, Corey, what sets this report apart from others that we've seen? I'd say that while it is both comprehensive and specific, it is most importantly actionable. I actually describe the report as a roadmap and as a guide that, if followed, could really put us on firm footing to finally eradicate the anti-Black racism that has altered the life trajectories of generations of Black Angelenos. Now, I know that that's a pretty big commendation, but let me explain it a little bit. Though the barriers that impact Black life, our health, our wealth, our education, our stability, and ultimately our ability to thrive are well documented. And while these thorny and seemingly intractable issues have persisted for many generations, the power and promise of this report and roadmap is not in our interrogation of the issues, but in actually how we arrived at our recommendations. As Dr. Hancock mentioned, the process we undertook was to intentionally and deliberately center everyday community members and their thoughts and their experiences. So to provide a glimpse of what that means and what that might look like, imagine a virtual war room, virtual because of COVID, of more than 30 leaders across every sector of society: civic, labor, academic, government, philanthropy, private, nonprofit, clergy, you name it, coming together every other Friday for 8 months to listen. 8 months to listen to those who are closest to the issues, those with the lived experiences, those who have navigated and experienced firsthand our social safety net and our carceral system, those who know what it means to be homeless, those who have done all that they could to get support, but to no avail, and those who have resiliently lived through the most traumatic of situations, and they still had a deep love for their home, regardless of its unwillingness to love them back. It was their voices that guided this collective of leaders from every corner of our Black LA society to roll up our sleeves and match their narratives with the data that we have all come to know both intuitively and professionally. Our group met consistently and in some subcommittee formations in between to flesh out recommendations that were feasible and doable if only corporate, philanthropy, government, and nonprofit stakeholders could work together to truly put an end to what many of us have begun to unfortunately accept as a fate that starts and stops with racism. That is what this report represents. It's a plan, a set of steps, a roadmap that, if we're followed, could inevitably change the lives of Black Angelenos and their future families forever. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't end by saying thank you to those who shared their stories and for entrusting this group to responsibly hold each and every experience with care. We will not let you down. I also want to acknowledge the thoughtful leadership of this group and the contributions of each and every working member in taking the time to listen, to learn, and to unlearn in this iterative process for change making. As a member of a community organizing institution, the commitment paid to the dynamic process of centering the voices of everyday people is one that I just don't take lightly. And lastly, being on this journey with fellow Black Angelenos was both cathartic and revelatory for me. It was also really empowering and momentous because I believe that the future for Black life in LA that is outlined in this roadmap is bright and brimming with great hope. And if we were to just follow it, then our collective efforts will put the eradication of anti-Black racism in LA well within reach. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. My name is Miguel Santana. I'm the president and CEO of the Weingart Foundation and the chair for the Committee for Greater Los Angeles. The No Going Back report started with a promise to take a deeper look at the Black experience led by African-American leaders. We are so proud that this report brilliantly fulfills this commitment. The recommendations are based on an honest account of the Black experience placed in historical context and celebrates the community's resilience and many contributions made to LA culture and life. The bold recommendations are based on data, intersect industries and issues, and have clear metrics to ensure accountability. On behalf of the Committee for Greater LA, I want to thank April Verrett for leading with love and conviction, the Black Experience Action Team for their time and input, Dr. Ange-Marie Hancock-Alfaro and the entire academic team for their brilliance, and Kamina Smith and Jelani Hendricks for their invaluable support. I also want to thank all the supporters that made this possible. The pandemic we all experienced was historic, and so is today. This roadmap to end anti-Black racism in LA by a cross-sector of representation of the African-American leadership is something to celebrate. Now the responsibility falls on each of us, leaders in government, business, philanthropy, and the nonprofit sectors, to listen, engage, and act. As April stressed, this is not just a report, it is a call to action. Inspired by the activism of the last year, many corporations, elected leaders, and foundations made statements in support of Black lives. This roadmap makes this commitment real and challenges all of us to go beyond statements and act by making tangible investments of time and dollars for the long term. Now is the time to be accountable to our words and to do our part to combat anti-Black racism by joining arm in arm with the Black community in the realization of the shared vision for a greater, more just and inclusive LA. And I am so proud that the Committee for Greater LA and the Weingart Foundation are committed to doing its part. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank you first for allowing me a seat. My name is Rita Stevens, and I experienced 21 years of my life unshackled, starting from the tender age of 9, with 12 arrests, 10 drug treatment programs, and a series of unhealthy relationships. I am a survivor of domestic. In the end, I was facing 4.5 years in prison on a 3-year joint suspension with enhancement, a probation officer from hell, and nothing and no one to turn to. I was completely alone. While recognizing the need for mental health services, the shame, guilt, and remorse prevented me from seeking services until I became suicidal. Understand this. I was too busy worrying about what you would think about me. I support this report. It is in solidarity with the Black people experience homelessness ad hoc report and highlight the intersections of criminal justice, substance abuse, mental health, physical health, education, unhealthy, racist social structures, racist systems, and more. If you don't know what the problem is, there is no solution. This report identifies the problem and provides solutions. This report is a roadmap for government to take action, to activate solutions that will resolve these problems. I repeat, this report is the roadmap for government to take action, to activate solutions that will resolve these problems. They are clearly stated and outlined in the report, but it only matters if we are willing to act. Not one more study or report to avoid action. It is called act. Act and address the problem. Act and implement solutions directed from this report. I call on our government, private sectors, providers, and others to act and implement swiftly, focusing only on first, housing, second, immediate services, and handcuffs never for Black people living in Los Angeles. I call on the community at large to act and advocate for transparent metrics stated on page 29 as well as on page 13, and adopt the vision on page 10 with transparent metrics to support this vision. Those of us who are unserved, underserved, and are inappropriately served deserve nothing less than sustained actions that are relentlessly centering on equity. Act to ensure a healthy living environment, to create youth power across the multiple systems. Right now is the time to place all focus on all resources on the community that has been most abused and disenfranchised. Black people, right now is the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reba, for continuing to be vulnerable, to tell your truth, speak truth to power, and enable us to view the world through your eyes and with the hope to make it all better. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's not often that we get to live our purpose so clearly in the work that we do every day. And I just want to thank everyone who has had a role in the work of this report. Thank you, thank you, thank you for allowing me to fully live the purpose that I know that I was created for, through being able to work with the amazing people. Thank you so much to the members of the steering committee. Thank you, thank you, thank you to Reba and Kasima and others who shared their stories. Thank you, Jelani and Kamina, for shepherding us. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Miguel, for your vision and for your support and your friendship. Oh, I'm sorry, Karen. I forgot, I got so excited. Please, Karen, go ahead.
So I'm so happy to be part of this conversation today. And, you know, it's really been a pleasure to be at the table with leaders from so many different aspects of our work and life here in Los Angeles. 20 years ago, I founded my organization, LA Commons, to use art and culture to build the community connections that power social change. We have witnessed South LA residents rise up, led by artists and young people, and create positive artistic visions of their neighborhood that inspire them to get civically engaged. The report, as you will see, places art and center as an important through line, a cross-cutting force that furthers empowerment, creativity, opportunity, and healing at both the individual and community level. I would say that one of our biggest challenges moving forward is really to counter the anti-Black racism that permeates our systems based on millions of individual decisions made every day. So what we really need to focus on is changing the narrative. We've got incredible Black art and culture that provides a basis for doing just that, creating pro-Black content for distribution on all platforms and all contexts, murals, ad campaigns, TV shows. You know, as April created that incredible love letter, we love ourselves, we need everybody else to love us. So that is really what this changing the narrative is all about, reframing us in a positive light. There is no change. This societal change is not going to happen without this cultural change. But this is not the only way the arts have an impact. Consider youth development. Young people, along with artists, are super imaginers. They bring innovative strategies to surmount and address insurmountable challenges. Art and cultural engagement provides them with an on-ramp for them to tap their creativity and us to tap their leadership. We talk about that in the report, not to mention opening up opportunities for them to be involved in LA's robust creative economy. Culture is an exceptionally powerful tool to address health and wellness as well. First and foremost, we remember the isolation, the bonds that we missed so much during the pandemic. Art provides that. Also, responding and preventing even illness by bringing in the arts. We're doing a pilot right now at Fremont High School, actually with CoCo, that is really focused on giving residents agency through their culture to actually take charge of their health. The report really, as Ange Marie talked about, as all of our speakers have talked about, really is an intersectional approach to dealing with these issues. And if we work together, we can certainly address the challenges that we all put forth. But we can't do it alone. We really need everyone to join us in this fight, to come together and commit to a movement to create a positive narrative for Black people in LA. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Sorry about the mix up earlier, but I was in the middle of effectively thanking everyone who has touched this project, and that remains the same. Really, it was an absolute labor of love, and we appreciate all of you all. This report is not the end all be all. It's not perfect, but it is a report that is meant to spur us to action. It's just the beginning. Together, we will continue to fight for and advocate for a better Los Angeles. and to make sure that future generations live in an equitable society free from anti-Black racism, poverty, discrimination, and dehumanization. If we solve for the crisis in our communities that centers Black people, we believe we will solve for all of us. We will make sure LA becomes a model on how to empower and uplift the most vulnerable among us through innovation and collaboration. We have to get as many people involved as possible to make this happen. If we improve the conditions for some of us, we can improve them for all of us. Last but not least, there are 3 things we need you all to do. First, please go online, visit No Going Back LA, read the report, spend some time with it, and review the report. Again, it's entitled The Road to Racial Justice Runs Through Equity, Ending Anti-Black Racism in Los Angeles, and learn more about the Committee for Greater LA. Again, that's No Going Back LA. Read the report, spend time with it, review it. That's number 1. Number 2, there on the website, take the time to invest and take the Black LA Pledge that you can find on the website. And number 3, Tuesday, you heard Dr. Anjamarie talk about this. On Tuesday, there's going to be a motion introduced in the LA City Council dealing with ending that's an anti-racism motion authored by our champions, council members Ridley Thomas, Curran Price, and council member Harris Dawson. So please support the work of passing that motion and making sure it gets implemented. Thank you all for taking the time, and I'm going to hand it back to Anjamarie for the Q&A portion of our presentation.
Thank you, April. And I don't know if anybody has thanked you properly for your leadership. So I just, I know there are a lot of people who are on this call right now who were part of the process, and we want to make sure that that we lift you up, because trying to do this and shepherd this big ship, you are our fearless leader, and we appreciate that. And I now have so many things like a love letter to Los Angeles, like integrated into my language. So we do have time for questions. We've got a couple, so I'm gonna pull them from the chat. And I wanted to kind of ask a question that was, again, raised in the Q&A with regard to what can be done around what Black people are experiencing right now with a potential housing crisis, right? So we have this looming foreclosure, this looming eviction crisis that's kind of at hand. Excuse me. And so, Ms. Reba, I was going to ask you to talk a little bit about some of what needs to happen for people who are either at risk of homelessness or for Black people who are experiencing homelessness right now, as a partial answer to that question, please.
I think that what's important is to really take a look at the system, the current system as to how it is today. And the question becomes, is it an appropriate, does it provide appropriate services to those that are being served, and particularly Black people? You take, for instance, in Los Angeles County, there is what's called the coordinating entry system, the CS system. And we know for certain that it does not, fit, if you will, Black people when we're looking at the questions that is being asked and how we are actually approaching or addressing the issues that Black people face. That is number 1. In reference to housing, I think that it's really important that the community recognizes that this is a community issue. We can go all day long and talk about government and all of these other folks who are truly responsible, but it really takes the effort of the community being educated and informed and involved to make the difference, particularly for Black.
Thank you very much. We also do have some more specific recommendations around Black home ownership, looking at kinds of different ways, like neighborhood land trusts, to actually move that needle on ownership in common. And then, of course, we talked a little bit about some of the access points to the statewide resources that are in place for COVID-19 earlier in the presentation. There was also a question here about, sorry, let me just pull it up. About how this report can be a tool for the disruption of the status quo. And then there was another question about lifting up organizations and what works. So I'll answer those two myself, just because I was the curator of the report, and I can tell you and direct you to, in terms of lifting up what's working and what's innovative. So for each of the 7 issues, we actually highlight Black-led and Black empowering organizations who are doing innovative work, right? So we highlight, for example, Black Women for Wellness, who are doing innovative work around environmental justice. They started off, again, as an organization focused on Black women's health, and they went from kind of looking at toxic hair products, and the ways in which that's toxic to women's bodies, and actually started that as a ground to then move into an environmental justice kind of lens as well, right? So we look at different organizations and what they're doing around many of these different kinds of issues to make sure that we are telling the story of resiliency. In terms of this disrupting the status quo, I actually want to pitch it to both Corey and to Miguel, just to talk about in your different sectors, kind of the advocacy sector and in the philanthropic sector, what does this look like in terms of disrupting the status quo going forward?
I'll just sort of take a quick swing at this. One of the things that is very promising about the report and the ways in which it came together was that it sort of helped to set an agenda for what disruption should look like. It helps to sort of guide all of the different stakeholders in their various spaces and spheres of influence around what norm setting about what Black expectations should look like. What are the things that we should be asking for? How should we be advising the direction of funding? How should we be advising the disruption in the policy landscape? And that's particularly important right now, as there's a ton of resources that have just been injected by the American Rescue Plan and so many other types of funding apparatuses. And folks are sort of scrambling around, well, what do we do with it? Well, this report tells you exactly what to do with it. And so if we can just build the infrastructure to guide the swift and efficient allocation of those resources in a way that's going to be very material for the community, that is how we track progress in this particular context.
And I'll just add, I think last year we saw unprecedented activism in our community, celebrating and fighting for Black lives. Philanthropy in response came together throughout California and created the Black Freedom Fund that is intended to invest in more of that kind of activism, not just in the short term, but for the long term. Coupled with this report is a specific set of recommendations that the community will hold policymakers accountable to, government, other government officials, business, philanthropy, and the nonprofit sector. So this is really the context or the specific direction that that activism will lead towards. And so philanthropy is very committed to supporting those efforts. And as the committee, we're still incredibly supportive of providing whatever infrastructure support we need to ensure that the report is more than just something that is shelved and inspired, but it has life well beyond the release.
Thank you both. And so, Karen, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the arts and culture piece, knowing that we have, an art installation that's coming forward, but also really thinking about, what can be different across sectors to support the Black arts, right? If we think about the history of, Black music, for example, and Central Avenue, and now what's being done around, so many different areas of the arts. Can you talk a little bit about that piece of it?
Sure. My feeling about the arts, not only do we get the beauty of the expression, right, that you're talking about Central Avenue and all the amazing murals that are around Los Angeles that speak to our experience, but art is really, I mean, so much of change has to do with the heart. It's not only the technical aspects, it's the heart. It's getting people to change. And art is really what that is. It is such a powerful mechanism for that. Not only, the people that we want to benefit from the change, which, as Corey knows, are one of our partners in terms of, bringing art into organizing, but the broader community that also has to support the change. And so, really finding those ways to engage people in the conversation, in the planning, in the strategizing, and using artistic strategies to do that, I think is a really powerful way. Also, creativity. We are dealing with massive issues, so we need creativity to be a part of the process. We need to think exceptionally creatively. That's why, we've got to have youth involvement, because they are incredibly creative when it comes to thinking in new ways about solving problems. And so, the art really, as I said in my remarks, empowerment, opportunity, the creative economy and jobs, healing, the whole focus on health, embedding culture in the health service arena is a no-brainer to me. Like, so many ways that the arts can add to and benefit people in terms of wellness. And so I'm so appreciative to have the opportunity to participate in this context as the leader of an arts organization, and really appreciate, the fact that we are uplifting the arts as able to play a role in many of these areas. We haven't even talked about beautification of neighborhoods, which really has an impact on the way people feel about themselves. If they live in a beautiful place, it really makes and well-designed place, it makes a huge difference in terms of well-being. So I'm excited to engage the arts community and artists in this process going forward. And the thing I didn't mention was changing the narrative, which, as I said, is seminal to getting people to, join our movement.
Thank you very much. And I would just add, in terms of well-designed places, right, we also know that so many of the things we use in beautification are actually also good for the environment sometimes, like putting a lot of trees, public spaces that are car-free, right? There are lots of things that will actually also intersect with environmentally healthy and safe neighborhoods. So April, I want to ask you a question about the future of this report. We've received a question about how this report will be implemented, or what are some of the next steps. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We hope that this report becomes a living, breathing, again, call to action. There is a commitment from the members of the steering committee to continue to come together to figure out how we are continuing to lift up and move toward the goals that the report lays out. We hope that we are able to engage in an ongoing way with an academic partner to help track the data, right? This report is rooted in data. And so we want to make sure we continue to track the metrics to measure the success about whether or not we are achieving the goals that we've set out, or not. But it, again, is going to take all of us coming together. This is really a call to action for, I'll say it again because it bears repeating, corporations, philanthropy, government partners, as well as non-for-profits in the community to make plans and to dig in together. So this is only just the beginning, but we do hope that we will continue to have the resources to do this work together.
Thank you very much for that. And, I would just amplify that to say that when you look at the report, you can actually see some of the data we relied upon by clicking on the members of our academic council's video that they gave to us during this process. So if you want to learn about housing, you can look at the video from Mike Lenz at UCLA or Anthony Samad at Cal State Dominguez Hills. If you want to look at well-being, you can look at Cheryl Grills's video. If you want to learn about data, please check out my sister Lori Frazier's video. So again, you will be able to not just use the report in terms of the content that's on the webpage, but you'll also have some clickable links to the Mayor's Executive Directive 27, to any of these kinds of things that you may want to think about going forward, incorporating into your own work. So with the last kind of question, I just want to ask each one of us on the panel to kind of give like 2 words about what this feels like now that this report has kind of reached this moment, and what do you hope for going forward? So April, I'll start with you. What do you hope for going forward? 2 words.
I hope that we inspire Black Angelenos to live our best lives.
Thank you. Thank you. Corey, what do you hope?
That we rebuild trust.
Beautiful. Thank you. Ms. Reba, what do you hope?
I hope for more community involvement, more community awareness, to hold everyone, including ourselves.
Thank you. Karen, what do you hope for?
I hope that we can change the narrative so that the vision, I can't remember who said, I think maybe it was April that set out the vision, that we're actually able to get where we have set out to go. Thank you.
Thank you. And Miguel, what do you hope?
I hope for accountability, that this roadmap, everyone sees themselves in it and are ready to take action based on commitments that were made with words. And I also hope for collaboration, that it becomes a big part of the conversation of how all of us, all Angelenos, come together for a better Los Angeles.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, a wise man once told me that Los Angeles is the Silicon Valley of social justice. And so I do feel like if any city can make this commitment and can make it happen, we can. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We are very, very happy that you took the time. Please do check out the website, take the pledge, and follow us on social media so you can learn about next steps and where we're going next. Thank you.